I was grocery shopping with my MIL when she asked, "Are you still taking those vitamins?" "Yes, why?" I was confused because I thought she wanted us to have children. A woman's purpose is to give her husband children. You should really be trying for a baby. We are trying for a damn baby. That's literally why I'm taking prenatal vitamins. She rolled her eyes like she didn't believe me. I figured it was just another weird MIL moment until I walked into the pharmacy, because the pharmacist handed over my prenatal vitamins and whispered, "These won't work if you're taking other things." Before I could ask what she meant, she'd already turned to help the next customer. The next day, my neighbor caught me buying pregnancy tests. "Still putting up your little innocent facade?" She looked disgusted and shook her head before walking away. I figured my mother-in-law was just spreading rumors about me. Typical old lady BS. But to be sure, I searched my husband and I's bedroom for answers. I found an orange prescription bottle. Damien walked in and froze. "Why do you have these?" I asked, genuinely confused. He lunged forward, trying to grab the bottle. "Those are just..." I pulled it back, Googling the label. "These dates? You've been refilling these every month. Give them to me." His voice was sharp, desperate. "For 2 years. I looked up at him. "That's exactly how long we've been trying." His face went pale. "It's not what you think. You always insisted on bringing me vitamins in bed." The pieces were clicking together. "Said it was romantic. That you wanted to take care of me." "I did want to. You've been switching out my vitamins for abortion medication." I yelled, my voice eerily calm. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed?" His face drained of color. "I was offered partner at the firm. Senior partner. And I turned it down for a baby that you made sure would never exist." My voice cracked. "They said new mothers can't handle those hours." Damien sank onto the bed, his face gray. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Like what? Like me gaining 40 pounds from fertility drugs?" I lifted up my shirt to remind him of my belly. "Remember what you said? That you still found me attractive despite everything?" "I didn't mean..." I cried for hours in my car after that. My voice was rising. "Do you know where my college friends are right now? With their babies. Their second babies. Please, you have to understand. I haven't seen them in a year. Too ashamed to admit I'm still not pregnant." I was pacing now. "My sister won't even let me hold her baby anymore." "Why?" Damien asked weakly. "She says it's too painful to watch." I laughed bitterly. "My own sister pities me that much." "The money?" he started. $47,000. I cut him off. "My grandmother left me that money. Add our savings. The 401k loan. We'll get it all back and more," he said quickly. "Insurance covered the treatments. I've been collecting the reimbursements. We actually made money." "You've been profiting from this?" I screamed. "Submitting claims for fertility treatments while making sure they'd never work? That's insurance fraud. For treatments that never had a chance." I was almost screaming. "While you were collecting insurance money on babies you killed." Damien reached for me, but I shoved him away. 3 therapy sessions a week. I backed away. Dr. Mackenzie diagnosed me with depression. Tried to put me on medication, but I refused to make sure my fertility levels weren't affected. All because I couldn't understand why my body kept failing. "It wasn't your body. I know that now." I threw my hands up. "But I didn't then. When I was grieving babies that you made sure never had a chance." Damien was crying now, which made me feel better. "When's the last time we made love?" I asked. Without a thermometer, without a calendar, without checking if I was ovulating. He didn't answer. 2 years, I said. 2 years since we've been intimate without it being a medical procedure. I finally stopped pacing and looked at him. Really looked at him. "All while you were feeding me abortion medication." I pulled out the positive pregnancy test from my pocket. "I'm 8 weeks. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to jinx it." My hand went to my stomach. "You wanted our baby to be another miscarriage?" The words hung in the air between us. Damien flinched like I'd slapped him. "You're a carrier," he burst out. "Of Huntington's disease. Your father had it. You have it." I stared at him. "What?" His words tumbled out desperately. "You have a genetic mutation. 50% chance for any child. They'd suffer. Die slowly, painfully, before they turned 40. The room spun. "Okay, then we use IVF with genetic testing," I said slowly. "We adopt. We make that choice together." I couldn't. Instead, you made me a murderer without my knowledge. My voice broke. You held me while I cried over negative tests that were actually dead babies. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "My husband has been poisoning me, forcing abortions without my consent. I'm currently pregnant and have been unknowingly taking abortion medication." Car doors slammed outside. My mother burst through our front door without knocking. She must have been waiting outside. "You ungrateful girl. We saved those babies from suffering." "I wanted to be a mother," I whispered. "You all knew that. You watched me destroy myself trying." Damien's father appeared behind her. "Son, we need to go. Now." He started pulling Damien toward the back door. The sirens got louder. As I sat there crying, I remembered something else about my father. Something that changed everything. My dad never moved weird or forgot things like Huntington's patients do in those medical videos I'd watched 1,000 times. The front door crashed open and 3 officers rushed in while 2 more went around back where Damien's dad was still pulling him. One officer took the orange bottle from my shaking hand, using gloves, and dropped it into an evidence bag, while another blocked the hallway so nobody could leave. They separated us into different rooms, and I heard Damien's mom yelling about lawyers and rights, while an officer calmly told her to sit down. The female officer who stayed with me kept asking if I was hurt anywhere, and I just kept saying I was pregnant over and over. She radioed for paramedics, and within minutes, 2 EMTs were kneeling beside me checking my pulse and blood pressure. The male EMT looked at the evidence bag with the medication label and exchanged a worried glance with his partner before suggesting we go to the hospital right away. I nodded and let them help me onto the stretcher, even though I could walk because my legs felt like water. They loaded me into the ambulance, and the female officer said she'd follow us there to continue taking my statement. The ride took forever, but also happened too fast, and suddenly we were at the emergency room with bright lights and nurses everywhere. They moved me to a bed and started an IV while a tech drew what seemed like 20 tubes of blood. The nurse asked about the last time I took any medication, and I told her about the vitamin Damien gave me that morning, which made her write faster on her clipboard. An ultrasound tech wheeled in a machine and squirted cold gel on my stomach while everyone stayed quiet during the scan. She kept her face neutral, but I saw her pause on certain angles and type measurements with extra focus. The ER doctor came in and ordered more tests, including something called a quantitative HCG and complete metabolic panel. Hours passed with nurses checking on me every few minutes and taking more vitals. Around 3 in the morning, a woman in a gray suit walked in and introduced herself as Detective Deborah Hewitt from the Special Victims Unit. She pulled a chair close to my bed and spoke quietly about needing to take my statement whenever I felt ready. I started from the beginning with the pharmacy visit and my neighbor's comments and worked through everything that happened tonight. She wrote in a small notebook, and only interrupted to clarify dates and times which she seemed to think were important. When I got to the part about the insurance money, she asked if I had any statements or paperwork, which made me remember our filing cabinet at home. She asked if she could send officers to collect evidence from the house, including my pill organizer and anything from our bedroom. I signed 3 different consent forms, giving permission to search and seize whatever they needed for the investigation. While we waited for test results, I kept thinking about my dad and how his symptoms started with mood changes and confusion, not the movement problems that usually come first with Huntington's. The more I thought about it, the more wrong everything seemed because he never had the dance-like movements that give the disease its name. Detective Hewitt noticed my hands shaking harder and asked what I was thinking about. I told her about my dad, and she wrote down the name of the hospital where he died and said she'd look into it. The sun was coming up when she finally left with promises to stay in touch and a card with her direct number. The moment the hospital discharged me with instructions to follow up with my OB immediately, I called Dr. Muñoz's office, even though it was only 7:30. The receptionist heard the panic in my voice when I explained about the medication exposure and promised to squeeze me in that afternoon. I asked if I could go home to shower and change, but the officer who'd been waiting outside said detectives were still processing the scene. She offered to escort me there to grab some clothes and toiletries, but warned me it might be hard to see. The house looked the same from outside, but inside there was black powder on doorknobs and surfaces where they'd taken fingerprints. My bedroom had yellow evidence tape across the door, and I could see gaps where they'd taken things from the nightstand. The officer helped me pack a bag from the hall closet and bathroom, while I tried not to look at the bed where everything fell apart. I wonder what's really going through Damien's mind as he watches everything fall apart. The way he keeps trying to explain but can't finish his sentences makes me curious about how long he's been carrying this secret around. She drove me to the courthouse next, where a woman from Victim Services was already waiting. The advocate introduced herself as Queenie and led me to a small office with tissues and water bottles on every surface. She explained the protective order process and helped me fill out form after form about dates and incidents and fears. My hand cramped from writing, but she said details mattered and encouraged me to include everything I could remember. The judge would review it within 24 hours and decide whether to grant a temporary order before the full hearing. I wanted to call someone, but didn't know who would believe me or understand what happened. Finally, I sent my sister a text with just facts about finding medication and going to the hospital and needing somewhere to stay. She read it immediately according to the little notification, but didn't respond for 10 minutes that felt like hours. When she finally wrote back, it was just an address for a hotel she'd booked and paid for with a note saying we'd talk when I was ready. Detective Hewitt called me 3 hours later asking if I could meet her at the station because she'd already started tracking down the people who'd made those weird comments to me. I grabbed my bag and took an Uber since I couldn't drive myself with my hands still shaking. The police station smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner, and Detective Hewitt met me in the lobby with a folder already thick with papers. She led me to a small room with a recorder on the table and explained she'd found both the pharmacist and my neighbor within 2 hours of starting her search. The pharmacist had been really nervous at first, but when Detective Hewitt explained the situation, she'd broken down crying and said she'd been wanting to report something for months, but didn't have proof. She'd noticed the prescription pattern and recognized the medication as something that shouldn't be taken with prenatal vitamins, but when she'd tried to look up who was prescribing it, the system showed a doctor from 3 states away who'd never treated me. My neighbor's statement was even worse because she admitted my mother-in-law had been coming to her house for coffee every week for the past year, telling her stories about how I was refusing to give them grandchildren on purpose and taking birth control behind my husband's back. The neighbor said she'd believed it because my mother-in-law seemed so sad and desperate for grandchildren, and why would a sweet old lady lie about something like that? Detective Hewitt showed me the written statements, and I had to read them 3 times before the words made sense because seeing it all written down officially made everything real in a way that made my stomach hurt. After leaving the station, I went straight to Dr. Muñoz's office, even though my appointment wasn't for another hour, because I couldn't sit still in that hotel room thinking about what might be wrong with my baby. The receptionist took one look at my face and brought me straight back to an exam room where I changed into a gown with shaking fingers. Dr. Muñoz came in carrying my file and a box of tissues and didn't say anything at first, just squeezed my shoulder before starting to set up the ultrasound machine. She squirted the cold gel on my belly and moved the wand around slowly while I held my breath watching the screen for any sign of movement. Then there it was, a tiny flicker on the screen, and Dr. Muñoz turned up the volume so I could hear the fast whoosh 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 of a heartbeat that sounded strong and perfect. We both started crying at the same time, and she had to wipe her eyes before she could take measurements and check all the parts she needed to examine. She printed out 6 pictures for me and explained that while the medication exposure was definitely concerning, the baby was measuring right on track for 8 weeks with good cardiac activity and normal development so far. She scheduled me for weekly appointments to monitor everything closely and gave me her personal cell number in case anything felt wrong between visits. The medical assistant brought in a stack of consent forms for me to sign authorizing release of all my medical records to the police and comprehensive toxicology testing to document exactly what was in my system. I signed every single paper without reading them because I wanted every possible test and record that could help protect my baby and build the case. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at the hotel from our insurance company with statements going back 2 years showing reimbursements for fertility treatments that I'd never seen. The checks had all been deposited into an account that wasn't ours, and the amounts added up to almost $30,000 that Damien had been collecting while poisoning me. I called Detective Hewitt immediately, and she came to pick up the statements saying this added mail fraud and insurance fraud to the growing list of charges. She explained that each fake claim he'd submitted was a separate federal crime, and with this many claims he was looking at serious prison time just for the fraud alone. That same afternoon, I went to the bank down the street from the hotel and opened my own account in just my name. The teller was a young woman who didn't ask any questions when I transferred half our joint savings even though my hands were shaking so bad I could barely sign my name. She just printed the receipt and slipped me a card for their domestic violence resource line, along with my new debit card. Back in my hotel room, I spent the next 6 hours writing down everything I could remember about the past 2 years. Every conversation about babies, every time Damien brought me vitamins in bed, every negative pregnancy test, every doctor's appointment, every symptom I'd had that I'd blamed on stress or fertility drugs. The timeline that emerged showed a clear pattern of him refilling the abortion medication the day before each of his romantic vitamin deliveries and scheduling his business trips right after to avoid dealing with the aftermath. Detective Hewitt called the next morning to tell me my neighbor had given a longer statement with more details about my mother-in-law's visits. Apparently, she'd been telling the whole neighborhood that I was a selfish career woman who cared more about making partner than giving her son children, and that I was secretly taking birth control while pretending to try for a baby to keep Damien happy. The deliberate isolation campaign became clear when I realized why none of our neighbors would talk to me anymore and why I'd stopped getting invited to the block parties. Detective Hewitt had also gotten the pharmacy records through a warrant, and they showed the abortion medication being filled like clockwork every month for 2 years, always exactly 1 day before Damien would bring me my special vitamin surprise in bed. The precision of his planning made me run to the bathroom to throw up, because he'd calculated exactly how to hurt me while making it look like love. Dr. Munoz called that afternoon saying she'd written a detailed medical letter for the case explaining exactly what risks the specific medication posed to developing fetuses, including potential birth defects, developmental delays, and increased miscarriage risk. The technical medical terms somehow made it more real and terrifying than when she'd explained it in person, because seeing it written in black and white by a medical professional made it impossible to pretend this wasn't as bad as I thought. While organizing my phone to back up evidence, I found a voicemail from my mother-in-law from 2 days before everything exploded where she said we needed to talk about what was best for everyone, and that sometimes difficult decisions had to be made for the greater good. I immediately forwarded it to Detective Hewitt, who said it was perfect evidence of conspiracy and showed prior knowledge of the plan. 2 days later, I sat in a small conference room at the district attorney's office, while Ada Maggie Coulter spread out folders across the table. She explained the charges they were considering, which included assault, poisoning, reproductive coercion, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The list kept growing as she flipped through pages of evidence Detective Hewitt had gathered. She was honest about the challenges ahead since reproductive coercion cases were rare and juries sometimes struggled to understand them, but she said the physical evidence was strong, especially with the pharmacy records and the insurance fraud creating a clear paper trail. I signed more forms authorizing them to access my medical records and felt grateful someone was finally taking this seriously. The next morning, Queenie Haynes from Victim Services met me at my apartment with a clipboard and a kind smile. She walked through every room checking windows and doors while making notes about security upgrades I needed. We installed new deadbolts that afternoon, and she helped me set up a doorbell camera that sent alerts to my phone. She gave me a safety plan worksheet to fill out with emergency contacts and safe places I could go if needed. Having someone whose only job was keeping me safe felt like being wrapped in a blanket after being cold for so long. She programmed the domestic violence hotline into my phone and showed me how to send a quick emergency text to 911. That same afternoon, I called the hospital where my father died 7 years ago and asked for his complete medical records. The records clerk said it would take 2 weeks to process, but I paid the rush fee to get them sooner. Something about Damien's claim about Huntington's disease had been bothering me, because I remembered my dad's symptoms differently than what I'd read online about that disease. His decline had been faster, and his confusion had been different from what Huntington's patients usually experienced. I needed to see what his actual doctors had written, not what Damien had told me. These pharmacy records showing medication filled exactly 1 day before each vitamin surprise make me wonder how long Damien spent planning this whole scheme. The neighbor saying his mother visited weekly for coffee to spread lies about birth control. The next day, HR called me in for a brief meeting about medical leave options. My boss had already approved emergency leave, and they explained how short-term disability would work if I needed more time. They didn't ask for details, which I appreciated since I wasn't ready to explain everything to coworkers. My boss sent a simple email saying to take whatever time I needed, and that my projects were covered. Professional support without prying questions helped me keep some dignity, while everything else fell apart. Later that week, Detective Hewitt asked me to come review the insurance paperwork they'd collected from our files. As we went through reimbursement statements, I noticed checks being sent to a PDO box I'd never seen before. The address was in the next town over, and Damien had apparently been collecting these checks for 2 years. Each one was for thousands of dollars from fertility treatments that he knew would never work. The detective photocopied everything and said this would strengthen the fraud charges significantly. The financial betrayal somehow hurt differently than the physical violation, maybe because it showed such careful planning. Dr. Munoz called me in that Friday to discuss genetic testing options since Damien's claim about Huntington's had raised questions. She explained I could test just myself first to see if I carried the gene, then test the baby only if needed. The choice felt huge, but at least it was mine to make this time. She said we could do a simple blood draw for my test and have results in 2 weeks. I decided to do it because I needed to know the truth after so many lies. She drew 3 vials of blood and I watched them label each one carefully. The next Monday, Detective Hewitt called to say they were executing a search warrant on our home office that afternoon. I gave her the garage code and she said I didn't need to be there, which was a relief. She called back 3 hours later saying they'd found correspondence between Damien and various insurance companies hidden in a locked filing cabinet. There were claim forms, appeal letters, and detailed records of every fraudulent reimbursement. The scope of the fraud was bigger than we'd thought, with claims totaling over $90,000. Each document they found added another piece to the case they were building. Tuesday morning, I went back to Dr. Mackenzie for therapy, but this time we focused on trauma coping instead of the depression she'd been treating me for. She helped me see how the false diagnosis of depression had shaped everything, how I'd blamed myself for not being happy when my body kept failing. We practiced grounding techniques for when the panic hit, and she taught me how to recognize trauma responses versus actual threats. She said my hypervigilance was normal after what happened, and we'd work on feeling safe again slowly. 2 weeks after my hospital visit, the preliminary toxicology results came back confirming exposure to abortion medication. The lab found traces in my system at levels consistent with regular ingestion over time. The timeline matched perfectly with Damien's romantic vitamin deliveries. Seeing it confirmed by science, documented in medical language on official letterhead, somehow made it more real and more horrible at the same time. I threw up after reading the report, even though I already knew what it would say. 3 days later, the bail notification arrived in my email at 6 a.m. He was out on $50,000 bond with conditions including no contact, staying 500 feet away from me, and GPS ankle monitoring. Queenie came over immediately when I called her panicking. She helped me update all my safety protocols and reminded me the GPS meant they'd know instantly if he came near me. We practiced what I'd do if I saw him somewhere public, and she stayed with me until I stopped shaking. The no-contact order was supposed to make me feel safe, but knowing he was out there somewhere made my skin crawl. The locksmith came that same afternoon and replaced every lock while I followed him room to room with my credit card. He installed deadbolts on doors that never had them and gave me 6 copies of the new keys, keeping one in my car, one at work, one with Queenie, and hiding the others in places Damien would never think to look. The security company arrived next and mounted cameras at every entrance, the technician showing me how to check the feeds on my phone while he drilled holes for the wiring. I documented every receipt, every installation photo, every new security measure in a folder labeled Protection Order Evidence that I shared with Detective Hewitt. My phone buzzed while the technician was testing the motion sensors, and it was Kingsley Fraser from work asking if I needed anything. "I can handle the James presentation next week," he texted. No questions about why I'd been out. I typed back yes immediately, relief flooding through me that someone at work was being normal about this whole mess. He sent back a thumbs up and the meeting invite disappeared from my calendar, replaced with his name as presenter. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started building a spreadsheet of every symptom I'd had over the past 2 years, every doctor's appointment, every negative pregnancy test. The dates lined up perfectly with Damien's prescription refills, a pattern so clear I couldn't believe I'd missed it before. I color-coded the entries: green for normal vitamin days, red for the days he'd brought me special vitamins in bed, yellow for the days I'd felt sick or had bleeding. The visual made me want to throw my laptop across the room, but instead I shared the file with Detective Hewitt and Maggie Coulter, adding notes about which symptoms happened when. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from the hospital where my dad died, his medical records going back 15 years. I spread the papers across my dining table, scanning through test results and doctor's notes until I found what I was looking for. There it was in black and white, a neurologist's assessment from 6 months before he died stating, symptoms consistent with frontotemporal dementia, no indication of Huntington's disease, genetic testing not warranted. My hands shook as I photographed every page, texting them immediately to Detective Hewitt. The whole foundation of Damien's lie, the reason he claimed he was protecting future children from suffering, it was completely made up. Dad never had Huntington's at all. The genetic counselor Laurent Ahmed called me the next morning after getting my referral from Dr. Munoz. "We can test for the Huntington's mutation without anyone else knowing the results," he explained calmly. "You'd be the only one with access unless you specifically authorize release." He walked me through the process, how they'd take blood, run the genetic panel, and have results in about 2 weeks. Even if you test positive, which is unlikely given your father's actual diagnosis, there are options for having healthy children, he said. I made the appointment for that afternoon, not wanting to wait any longer to know the truth. The lab was empty when I arrived, just me and the technician who drew 3 vials of blood while I stared at the wall. She put a bright yellow sticker on the samples marking them as confidential genetic testing, requiring special handling and restricted access. I signed the form stating only I could receive the results. No exceptions. Not even for medical emergencies. Walking out of the lab felt like taking back control of my own body for the first time in years. 2 days later, Detective Hewitt emailed me the bail hearing transcript, and I read it 3 times, my anger growing colder with each pass. Damien's lawyer had actually stood in front of a judge and argued this was about benevolent intent to prevent suffering, painting my husband as some kind of hero saving hypothetical children from a genetic disease that didn't even exist. The lawyer claimed Damien was trying to protect me from the burden of watching our children die young, that his actions came from love, not malice. The transcript showed the judge wasn't buying it, calling the behavior unconscionable violation of bodily autonomy, but the defense's attempt to spin forced abortion as mercy made me want to scream. I printed the whole thing and highlighted every lie, every manipulation of facts, creating my own annotated version that I sent back to Detective Hewitt. That afternoon, I called the state pharmacy board and filed a formal complaint about the pharmacy that had been filling these prescriptions for 2 years. The woman on the phone took down every detail, the prescription numbers, the dates, the fact that the medication was being given to someone who didn't know they were taking it. She said an investigator would review the case and determine if the pharmacy should have caught the suspicious pattern. I gave her Detective Hewitt's contact information, and she promised to coordinate with the criminal investigation. My sister texted me while I was finishing the pharmacy complaint, asking if I wanted to meet for coffee the next day. I stared at her message for 5 minutes before typing back yes, picking a place halfway between our apartments. We sat outside despite the cool weather, both of us holding our cups like shields. I need help understanding the insurance stuff, she said without any small talk. Mom won't tell me anything. I pulled out the folder of statements I'd been organizing and walked her through the fraud, showing her the claims, the reimbursements, the money that went to a P.O. box I never knew existed. She took notes on her phone, asking practical questions about coverage and legal implications, never once mentioning babies or pregnancy or any of the painful stuff between us. When we finished talking about paperwork, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand once, quickly, before pulling back. "Same time next week?" she asked. I nodded, feeling something small and fragile starting to rebuild. So Detective Hewitt finds $90,000 in fraudulent claims hidden in locked filing cabinets? That's quite a paper trail for someone who thought they were being clever. Makes me wonder if Damien actually believed he'd never get caught, or if he just didn't care about leaving evidence everywhere. The next morning was my 8-week follow-up with Dr. Munoz, and I sat in the waiting room surrounded by other pregnant women, trying not to compare myself to them. The ultrasound showed a tiny flickering heartbeat, stronger than last time and measurements that matched my dates perfectly. "Everything looks good," Dr. Munoz said carefully, printing out pictures for me. "The baby is growing exactly as expected despite everything you've been through." She scheduled my anatomy scan for 12 weeks out, writing the appointment on a card that I tucked into my wallet like a promise. 3 days later, Detective Hewitt called me to her office and spread printed text messages across her desk. Screenshots from Damien's phone that made my stomach turn. The messages between him and his mother went back months, talking about managing my expectations and keeping the situation under control, like I was some kind of problem to solve. One message from his mother said she'd talked to the pharmacist about being discreet. Another mentioned how she'd been telling neighbors I was being difficult about having kids. Detective Hewitt pointed to dates on the messages that matched up with my worst days, the days I'd cried in fertility clinic parking lots while they were planning their next move. She slid the papers into a folder and told me these would help build the conspiracy charges, that the planning made everything worse legally. The next afternoon, I met with Maggie Coulter at the courthouse, and she walked me through a whiteboard covered with different charge levels and sentences. She explained that first-degree assault carried more time than reproductive coercion, but proving intent was harder, and the insurance fraud charges were federal, which meant different courts. She drew circles showing how plea deals worked, how they might offer to drop some charges if he admitted to others, and warned me that most cases ended in pleas, not trials. Her honesty helped me understand what was realistic instead of what I wanted, which was him in jail forever. That evening, I pulled out every document from my grandmother's estate, spreading bank statements and withdrawal records across my kitchen table. I added up every penny we'd spent on fertility treatments, the loans we took out, the savings we emptied, writing each number in a notebook until the total made me dizzy. $47,000 from my inheritance, $12,000 from our joint savings, $8,000 from the 401k loan, plus interest we were still paying. I photographed every page and emailed them to Detective Hewitt, then made copies for the insurance investigator who was building her own case. 4 days later, the doorbell rang and I signed for a certified letter from the genetic testing lab, my hands shaking as I opened it. The results were clear in black and white. No Huntington's mutation detected, no carrier status, nothing that would have passed to any children. I read it 3 times before the rage hit, remembering all his tears about protecting future babies from suffering when there was never any risk at all. I called Detective Hewitt immediately, and she came to pick up the results herself, saying this destroyed their whole defense strategy. She took my official consent to use the results in court, explaining how this proved the entire foundation of their actions was a lie. The insurance fraud investigator showed up the next morning with a recorder and dozens of questions about the fertility clinic visits. She went through each claim Damien had submitted, showing me his signatures on forms claiming treatments that he knew would never work because of what he was doing. Halfway through, she noticed my hands shaking and got up to get me water from my kitchen without asking, then waited while I steadied myself before continuing. She explained that insurance fraud over $25,000 became a federal crime, which meant the FBI might get involved, and asked if I was prepared for that level of investigation. My mother called that night and I almost didn't answer but decided to face it head on. She started talking about how Damien's parents had convinced her it was for the best, how they showed her articles about Huntington's, how they made her believe she was protecting future grandchildren. I cut her off and told her she chose to believe strangers over her own daughter, that she watched me suffer for years and did nothing. When she tried to argue, I said I needed space to heal and hung up, then blocked her number for the first time in my life. The power of that simple action, pressing that block button, felt like taking back a piece of myself. 2 days later, Dr. Mackenzie worked with me on testimony preparation, teaching me grounding techniques for when memories got overwhelming. She had me practice telling my story while pressing my feet into the floor, focusing on physical sensations instead of getting lost in the emotions. We went through the worst parts over and over until I could say them without crying, not because I didn't feel it, but because I could control how I showed it. She taught me to pause and breathe when lawyers would try to confuse me, to ask for questions to be repeated if I needed time to think. The skills felt like armor I was building, protection for whatever legal battles were coming. That Saturday, I forced myself to try a prenatal yoga class at the community center, picking a spot by the door in case I needed to run. The other pregnant women chatted about nurseries and names while I focused on not panicking, on just breathing and moving my body that still didn't quite feel like mine. But I made it through the whole hour, even the meditation at the end where the instructor talked about connecting with our babies. Walking to my car afterward felt like climbing a mountain, but I'd done it. I'd been in a room with other pregnant women and survived. Monday morning, Maggie called with news about a plea offer from Damien's lawyer, asking me to come review it that afternoon. She explained it wasn't what I wanted, but it was something. 18 months for assault, 3 years for insurance fraud, sentences to run concurrently, which meant he'd serve 3 years total. The reproductive coercion charges would be dropped because they were harder to prove, and the conspiracy charges would be reduced. She said this was actually better than many cases got, that juries sometimes didn't understand reproductive coercion, that having him admit guilt and serve time was still justice even if it wasn't enough justice. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a legal pad and started writing my victim impact statement, focusing on the choices he stole from me, rather than how sad I felt about it. My hands shook as I wrote about consent and autonomy, about medical decisions made without my knowledge, about the right to know what was happening to my own body. I kept crossing things out and starting over, trying to find words that would make the court understand without sounding like I was asking for pity. The draft took 3 hours, and when I finished, I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Not ready to send it yet, but needing to have my truth written down somewhere. Weeks passed and my belly grew rounder, the baby moving more each day, tiny kicks that reminded me this one was real and alive despite everything. At my 20-week anatomy scan, the technician measured every part of the baby while I held my breath, waiting for bad news that never came. Dr. Munoz came in after reviewing the images and actually smiled. A real smile, not the careful professional one, as she showed me how everything was measuring perfectly normal. We both let out this long breath at the same time, neither of us realizing we'd been holding that tension for so long. The restraining order hearing came 2 weeks later, and I wore my most professional outfit, the one from before pregnancy that barely fit anymore. I sat in the witness chair and answered every question clearly while Damien's lawyer kept trying to make it sound like I was overreacting to a marital disagreement. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, saw right through it and extended the protective order for 2 full years, adding specific provisions about third-party contact through family members. Maggie called me the next afternoon to say the insurance investigator's report had come in, and she was filing additional fraud charges based on the evidence. The case was getting stronger with each document they found, each forged signature, each false claim he'd submitted while I thought we were trying for a baby. Kingsley came over that weekend with his laptop and helped me build a detailed spreadsheet showing every penny we'd spent on fertility treatments, every lost opportunity, every financial decision I'd made thinking we were building a family. Using my professional skills for this, organizing data and calculating damages, made me feel competent for the first time in months. I spent Sunday afternoon going through our photo albums, packing away every picture with his parents, but keeping the ultrasound images on my refrigerator where I could see them every morning. Choosing what to keep and what to the store felt like drawing boundaries around my life, deciding what belonged in my future and what needed to stay in the past. The insurance investigator called Monday to tell me they were starting their own civil case against Damien, separate from the criminal charges. Having multiple systems working at the same time, criminal and civil courts plus insurance fraud investigations, brought this weird comfort knowing he couldn't escape all of them. Dr. Mackenzie and I spent our next session working through the guilt I carried about not seeing the signs earlier, about trusting him when there were probably hints I missed. She helped me understand that self-blame was just another way he was still controlling my thoughts, that trusting your spouse wasn't stupid, it was normal. Detective Hewitt's text message evidence makes me curious about how long Damien's mother was really involved in this whole scheme before they started documenting their plans. The genetic test results proving no Huntington's mutation. That's interesting timing, coming right when they need to build. Detective Hewitt called that Thursday with an update that made me actually laugh for the first time in weeks. Both his parents had given statements, but their stories didn't match at all. His mom saying it was all Damien's idea while his dad claimed it was a family decision made years ago. Their lies were falling apart, and watching their story crumble brought this grim satisfaction I didn't know I could feel. I spent the next 3 days revising my victim impact statement, taking out the emotional parts and focusing purely on autonomy and consent, on the medical violations and the stolen choices. The final version was 2 pages of clear facts about what he took from me, not asking for any specific punishment, but making sure my truth would be part of the official record forever. The next morning, I caught myself refreshing the court website for the 10th time before noon, and finally closed my laptop. I called Queenie and asked her to handle all the legal updates from now on, unless something major happened. She agreed right away, and I felt my shoulders drop with relief. 2 days later, at my regular OB appointment, the nurse frowned at my blood test results, and Dr. Munoz explained I had mild anemia. She handed me an iron supplement prescription and said it was totally normal for pregnancy. After weeks of worrying about abortion drugs and genetic tests, having a regular pregnancy problem actually made me smile. The pharmacy had my iron pills ready in 20 minutes, and I took the first one right there with a bottle of water. That Thursday afternoon, Maggie called while I was folding laundry. She explained the grand jury would probably vote to indict on several felony counts, but warned me the actual trial wouldn't start for at least 6 months. I thanked her and hung up feeling oddly calm about the slow timeline. Friday evening, Queenie texted me about a support group for women who'd been pregnant after loss, and I decided to try it. The meeting was in a church basement on Tuesday night, and I sat near the door just in case. When my turn came, I managed to say 3 sentences about my situation before my voice cracked. The woman next to me squeezed my hand, and nobody pushed me to say more. I went home feeling lighter somehow. That Saturday morning, I woke up early and made pancakes just for myself. While I mixed the batter, I talked to my belly about silly things like the weather and what toppings to use. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter, and for 30 minutes, nothing else mattered. I ate slowly at the kitchen table, one hand on my growing bump, telling the baby about my grandmother who taught me this recipe. It became my new Saturday routine for the next 3 weeks. Each weekend, I'd make a different flavor and chat with my belly about random memories. Detective Hewitt called on a Wednesday afternoon to confirm the grand jury date was officially set. She said my written statement was enough and I wouldn't need to testify in person. I actually laughed with relief and thanked her 3 times before hanging up. That night, I slept 8 hours straight for the first time in months. The next morning, I printed out my impact statement and read it one more time. Every word felt true and steady without asking for revenge or specific punishment. I signed it, put it in an envelope, and mailed it to Maggie's office that afternoon. Walking back from the post office, I felt grounded in a way I hadn't in forever. 2 weeks passed with iron pills and Saturday pancakes and avoiding legal websites. My 24-week appointment finally arrived on a sunny Thursday morning. Dr. Munoz squeezed gel on my belly and moved the Doppler around until that beautiful whoosh whoosh filled the room. She counted the beats and smiled, saying everything looked perfect and the baby was growing right on schedule. She printed out the heartbeat strip and handed it to me like a prize. I walked out of the medical building into bright spring sunshine and stopped on the sidewalk. Both my hands went to my round belly, and I stood there feeling the baby move inside me. Cars passed and people walked around me, but I didn't care. For the first time since finding those pills in our bedroom, since learning about the conspiracy, since discovering the lies about my dad, I felt actual hope bloom in my chest. This baby was real and strong and mine. The nightmare wasn't over, but I was going to be okay. We were going to be okay. Well, folks, that's been quite a ride. Really appreciate you hanging out with me and letting me ramble through all these thoughts today. It's been fun wondering about it all together. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.